Well, to discuss this further, let's talk to Sigurd Neubauer, who's a Middle East analyst. Thanks very much for joining us here on Al Jazeera. I mean, can you tell us why it appears that these bombing raids by the Saudi-led coalition are getting more intense and indeed so many more civilians appearing to be killed?
What we appear to be seeing is a doubling down by the Saudi-led coalition against the Houthis ahead of King Salman's upcoming visit at the White House. As we have known since September, King Salman is expected to arrive in early January for talks with President Trump. And we have seen a lot of diplomatic maneuvering behind the scenes. For instance, just last week, we saw that the State Department had pushed an initiative that would see the opening of the port of Hudaydah for humanitarian supplies. And the expectations in Washington are that once King Salman of Saudi Arabia arrives in Washington for his meeting with President Trump, that a comprehensive strategy for de-escalating and winding down the war in Yemen will be on the agenda.
Is it possible to tell who has the momentum in this conflict at the moment? We've obviously got the missiles coming in close to Riyadh. That seems to be the justification for the increasing airstrikes because, according to Saudi, the Iranians are backing the Houthis. But who actually do you think is managing to gain more ground?
Well, I don't think that there's any momentum on either side. Right now, what we have seen for quite some time is that there's a stalemate between the Saudi-led coalition and the Houthis on the ground. Even though the Saudis obviously have air superiority and ability to launch airstrikes across Yemen, they are not winning on the ground. So a political solution is a must in this situation, and this is where the United States now, in cooperation with the international community, will pressure the parties to begin some sort of reconciliation process. Obviously, in the last couple of weeks, that has been further complicated with the death of Ali Abdullah Saleh, the former longtime president of Yemen, and we have also seen some momentum of trying to cultivate the Islah Party of Yemen, which is the local Muslim Brotherhood affiliate, to see if they can partially help fill that gap. But there's been a lot of diplomatic maneuvering to help bring the parties of the conflict to the negotiations table. And in parallel, we're seeing that the Saudis now, by launching these attacks, are trying to secure strategic gains before any sort of peace talks can begin.
And on that, Jamie McGoldrick, who is the UN humanitarian coordinator, really with quite extensive language that we don't usually hear from the UN, calling this war futile and absurd, also saying that there are sort of children being killed by both sides, bad behaviour on both sides. Is it likely the UN can have any impact by turning up the rhetoric in this way?
I think it already has. I think that the UN has been consistent in its condemnation of these attacks that has targeted way too many civilians. And as we also know from previous UN reports, the war in Yemen has now unleashed the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the world. So these are very, very serious issues. And this is also why it is more important, perhaps than ever, that formal peace talks resume, and identifying players on the ground that could engage in these conversations.
Very good to get your thoughts on this, Sigurd Neubauer. Thanks for joining us on Al Jazeera.
Thank you.